It's me, it's CLG. Welcome back to CrashLove Gaming. Now I stopped caring about professional wrestling in about 2004, but since the launch of AEW last year, I've been all in. There's been a lot of talk about an AEW video game using a certain old beloved wrestling game engine because, let's be honest, modern wrestling games suck. They've turned into yearly releases full of bugs and DLC. But if you think 2K20 is the worst wrestling game, well, let me tell you something, brother. This is one of the earliest licensed pro wrestling games, Wrestlemania for the NES. There's a decent number of wrestlers to choose from, but this is some of the worst gameplay I've ever experienced. Just a lot of punching and kicking, and apparently Hulk Hogan invented the Judas effect in the 80s. At least the music is good. I guess I can give the controls a pass because the NES only had 2 buttons. It's kinda hard to fit attacks, grapples, finishing moves, reversals, and everything else into just 2 buttons. A few years later, Royal Rumble came out on the Super Nintendo, which had way more buttons, so let's see how that worked out. By God, it's the same shit. You can grapple and run now, but this honestly feels just as bad as the NES game. And why did they swing the chair that way? Who developed this trash?
It's me, Austin!
Aw, son of a bitch. And this is what wrestling games were like throughout the early to mid 90s. Here's Raw for the Genesis. Same exact game. After the release of the PlayStation, you figured things would get better. 2 more buttons and more powerful hardware than the Super Nintendo. What did they do with it? It's basically Mortal Kombat. The state of wrestling video games kind of mirrored the state of the WWF at the time. So what was going on with the other company, WCW? Their games were just as bad. I'm not going to go into it too much, but 616 Entertainment has a pretty amazing series of videos on the subject. I'll link those in the description. So the early and mid 90s were hard times for fans of wrestling and wrestling games, daddy. But then it happened. Eternal babyface Hulk Hogan turned heel, and Stone Cold Steve Austin cut a promo that kicked off the Attitude Era. With pro wrestling gaining so much popularity on TV, what happened with the video games? The WCW games were always based on Japanese wrestling games, but that didn't really help because they were also trash. That was until Virtual Pro Wrestling. The game itself is not that good. It's true. I kinda hyped it up, but just wait. Virtual Pro Wrestling was localized as WCW vs. the World and had wrestlers from WCW and various Japanese wrestling promotions. This game has so many more characters and match options than everything else that came before it. And you can't even compare the controls. Light and heavy strikes, weak and strong grapples, blocks, dodging, just everything was so much better. It never really made sense to have a health bar in wrestling because that's just not how matches go down. One guy could be on a roll, only to have a big move miss or be reversed, then go on to lose the match. And that's pretty much how the spirit meter works. You gain spirit essentially by being in control of the match. If you hit a finishing move while your opponent has low spirit, that's it. Like I said, WCW vs. the World wasn't an amazing game or anything, but it was the start of something wonderful. 9 months after the US debut of the Aki engine, or AKI, I'm going to call it Aki, it's easier to say, but WCW vs. NWA World Tour released on the Nintendo 64. This game heavily improved the engine and looks better than vs. the World. They really made good use of the N64's controller here. Moves are easy to pull off, and there's a different button to block strikes and dodge grapples, which adds a bit of strategy. And you can actually target body parts to make it more likely for your opponent to tap out or get KO'd. The spirit meter more clearly shows who has the advantage, and when that bar starts flashing red, you know a finisher is coming. And that brings up one of my main problems with this game. The powerbomb pin is not Sting's finisher. This basic back grapple is closer to his finisher than his actual finisher in this game. And that's the case for a lot of wrestlers. It's like they didn't have enough moves in the game to give everyone their actual movesets. It's like all the wrestlers in this game combined have a smaller move pool than John Cena. It reminds me of the old Yu-Gi-Oh games where the characters had a bunch of vanilla monsters in their decks because the cards they used in the anime and manga didn't exist in the actual card game yet. I wonder how many of you watching a video about wrestling games get that Yu-Gi-Oh reference. Alright, we got this amazing new engine ready to take the world of sports entertainment video games by storm. What does THQ do next? They try to double dip and release a game on the PlayStation developed by Inland Productions. You might be asking, who is Inland Productions? Good question. They're not AKI, I can tell you that much. If you didn't own an N64 but wanted to play a good WCW game, you were shit out of luck. WCW Nitro was a huge step back. Life bars, button combinations, everything is terrible. Except the character select screen. Press the circle button and you get amazing video clips like this.
Hey there! How'd you like to get power bomb? Come on. Pick me. I'm begging you, pick me. Please pick me.
Now WCW had a great foundation on the N64 and a cash grab on the PlayStation, so where was the WWF? Acclaim still had the publishing rights and they were ready to capitalize on the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. They did what the WWF sometimes did at the time and copied WCW. But instead of copying the good one, they went with the life bars and button combinations. I don't know about everybody else, but I was actually really excited for WWF Warzone. I would have probably considered myself more of a WCW fan at the time, but the cover had Stone Cold on it. Before I go into the gameplay, I want to talk about the presentation here. There's a really cool opening video that ties into the opening of Raw from that time. The wrestlers actually cut promos in story mode, and the graphics are not awful. You can actually really tell who these characters are supposed to be. Each wrestler also has their own entrance complete with CD quality music. They're not full entrances, the wrestlers just kind of walk in a frame, taunt, and walk away, but it's more than we got anywhere else at the time. Warzone was also the first time we get to create our own wrestlers. The character creator here is super basic and you couldn't choose your individual moves, but it was something. You also had Vince McMahon and good old JR on commentary, and that might actually be the best part of this game. The biggest problem with Warzone is the controls. I mentioned earlier they're based on button combinations. There is a grapple button, but unless you want to try to beat your opponent with 400 arm drags, you're gonna need to memorize some moves. You know how games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat just had a handful of moves to memorize for each character? Well, this is the move list just for Stone Cold. That's an insane amount of memorization. It's like playing Mortal Kombat, except every attack requires a fatality input. Just like on TV, WCW continued to dominate the WWF with the release of WCW NWO Revenge. This game makes World Tour look like a demo for the Aki engine. You know how a lot of wrestlers didn't have the right moves? Well, now they do. See, this is Sting's actual finishing move. They even vastly improved on the moves that were correct in World Tour, like the Stinger Splash and the Jackknife Powerbomb. Not just the moves, they improved on everything and it doesn't feel nearly as slow as World Tour did. Championship modes for 3 different titles, Battle Royals, so many more playable characters, a handful of different arenas, everything just felt better and more realistic compared to what else was available. Being on the N64, there was no full motion video or real entrance music, but look what they did for the intro. They obviously couldn't have a full-on TV style intro like Warzone, but they did the best they could with the limitations of the N64, and it's all in-game graphics. There are also a lot of little things like Macho Man's voice clip, for the fact that Sting starts his match with a baseball bat. There's still no created character, but you are able to alter the appearance of the available roster. You could use this to either update their outfits to what they were currently wearing on TV, or just make a whole new outfit. Despite the lack of character creation, entrance themes, and full motion video, Revenge was undoubtedly the best wrestling game up to this point. Everything up to WCW vs. the World was garbage, and that game itself was just the foundation for the Aki engine. World Tour improved on it, and Revenge added everything else World Tour lacked visually and continued to improve the engine. But again, much like what was happening on TV with actual pro wrestling, things would soon take a turn for wrestling video games. WCW Thunder came out on the PS1. It's just as bad as Nitro and not relevant to the story I'm telling here, but it's something that happened and I have to mention it. The only reason to even think about this game is the Rowdy Roddy Piper video.
Pick me! What's wrong with you? I heard Nash. Nash said don't pick me. Fine, because I can smash Nash. Pick Hogan? Put him to sleep 3 times.
Around this time is when more people started tuning into Monday Night Raw instead of Nitro. Long story short, the great Tony Schiavone spoiled the ending of Raw where Mick Foley was going to win the championship from The Rock.
Gonna put some butts in the seat.
It turns out it really did put a lot of butts in the seats because WWF consistently started winning the Monday Night Wars. And how do you think this correlated to the video games? It doesn't matter what you think because the two were very different things. Acclaim put out WWF Attitude, which was exactly like Warzone, maybe even worse just because Revenge existed. I mean, maybe it's better than Thunder, but again, Thunder is completely irrelevant. It's too bad they didn't have Bret Hart doing quality assurance.
There it is, right there in front of you the whole time. You're dereferencing a no pointer. Open your eyes.
Alright, it's been almost a year since Revenge has released, and the WCW is getting destroyed by WWF both creatively and in the ratings. But when it came to video games, the WWF was unjustifiably in a position they'd rather not be in. And how did they turn things around? I don't know how they did it, but I remember when I heard about it, I was on my computer connected to the internet with 28K dial-up, and there I saw it. Coming soon, WWF Wrestlemania 2000 on the N64, published by THQ and developed by AKI. And I was just as hyped for this as I was for something like Pokemon Gold and Silver. It was a huge deal. You know how much of an improvement Revenge was over World Tour? Double or triple that and you have Wrestlemania 2000. Entrance themes, cage matches, a ton of characters and arenas, proper story modes for each belt, create your own pay-per-view, and finally, create your own wrestler with a customized moveset. With every new game, AKI keeps getting better and better, and with the WWF at the height of their popularity, this was the best wrestling game at the time of release. I know I keep saying that, but they just couldn't be stopped. I also have to mention that this is around the time where WCW as a whole becomes irrelevant. Their shows and storylines were getting worse, and EA got the rights to publish their video games, and they were all just complete garbage after Revenge. Even the most hardcore WCW fans would have told EA to take Mayhem, turn that sumbitch sideways, and stick it straight up their candy ass. So now we're in the year Y2J, or Y2K. We have the best wrestling game ever on the N64, WCW is on life support, and PlayStation owners still don't have a good wrestling game. THQ once again tries to double dip and release a game on the PlayStation, this time with developer Yuke's. It was a lot more similar to the Aki engine than Nitro was, but it still couldn't compare to Wrestlemania 2000. They had the right idea, but the first couple SmackDown games felt very sloppy. The series would continue to improve over the next few years and become WWF's main series of games for the early 2000s, but the N64 wasn't tapping out just yet. The next game is still considered by some to be the best wrestling game ever, but unfortunately I'll have to save it for another video. And if you're not down with that, I got 2 words for you. Next time. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment, and let me know what your favorite wrestling game is. And follow me on social media at CrashLove Gaming. Hit me up on Twitter if you want to talk about games or wrestling. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you look forward to part 2, and I'll see you next time.